You are about to hear something that most men never realize, something that separates the average from the unforgettable. And if you're an older man watching this, I want you to understand something clearly. What makes you attractive is not what you think it is. It's not your age, your money, your experience, or even your confidence. It's something far more powerful, something so subtle that most men overlook it their entire lives, yet women feel it instantly. And once you understand it, once you embody it, you will never chase attention again, because attention will start chasing you. The truth is, there is a certain way older men move, a certain way they speak, a certain way they protect their peace, and they don't even realize how magnetic it is. Society keeps telling older men they're losing value, but the reality is the opposite. You are stepping into the stage of life where your presence becomes more dangerous, more refined, and more irresistible. If you know how to use it, most men will never hear what I'm about to tell you. They'll go their whole lives trying to impress, trying to compete, trying to stay relevant, not knowing that the real power is in doing the exact opposite. Younger women aren't drawn to older men by accident. They are drawn to something deeper, something psychological, something primal, something rooted in maturity that cannot be faked by youth. And once you see what ice actually is, once you understand why it pulls younger women in without effort, you will realize that you've been giving away your power for years without even knowing it. So stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal could completely change the way you see yourself and the way the world responds to you. There is something profoundly magnetic about a man who moves through life without the constant urge to prove himself, and this is where many older men accidentally unlock an attraction far beyond what they realize. It's not their age, not their experience alone, not even their wisdom in isolation. It's the quiet confidence that comes from finally understanding that they have nothing to prove to anyone. That's the energy younger men try so hard to imitate, but you cannot imitate what you have not earned. As men age, something transformative happens, not always, but inevitably for those who genuinely grow. They learn that the loudest version of confidence is usually the most fragile. They've lived through enough highs and lows, enough wins and humiliations to understand that real confidence is silent. It's the kind of certainty that doesn't need to be advertised, because it speaks through the way a man carries himself, the way he observes before he reacts, the way he chooses his words not to impress, but to express what is necessary. Younger men often express confidence in volume, through competition, bravado, and attempts to dominate the space around them. But older men who have evolved express confidence through presence. They walk into a room and don't demand attention. Attention naturally shifts toward them. And it's not because they are trying to be seen. It's because they embody something most people crave, a sense of inner stability in a world that constantly pulls at our insecurities. Quiet confidence is attractive because it shows a man who is no longer controlled by external validation. He is not chasing approval. He is not adjusting his personality depending on who he's talking to. He's not strategizing how to be liked. He simply shows up as who he is, and that alone becomes admirable. When a man reaches that stage, he stops performing for the world, and ironically, that's when the world starts paying attention. Women sense this immediately. They are intuitive by nature. They can feel when a man is speaking from insecurity versus when he is speaking from grounded certainty. They can sense when a man's actions are shaped by the fear of losing them versus when his actions come from clarity about who he is. And this is where older men naturally stand out. They have already gone through enough cycles of seeking and losing, of giving too much and receiving too little, of being overly available or overly invested, to know better. They reach a point where their self-worth is no longer negotiable. You want to understand something subtle yet powerful. Confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to let fear dictate one's behavior. Older men have felt fear, doubt, insecurity, heartbreak, betrayal. They've lived it. But the difference is, they have learned to walk through those emotions without allowing them to define their identity. That's why their confidence becomes quiet. There is no need to announce strength when you've spent years confronting your weaknesses. When you see a man who speaks softly yet carries weight in his words, who listens without feeling threatened, who responds without reacting emotionally, you are witnessing a man who has mastered the art of inner control, and that is far more alluring than the explosive confidence of youth. Younger women are not impressed by age itself, they are impressed by the psychological maturity that age often brings. A younger man might rely on external things to feel powerful: his looks, his popularity, his social status. But an older man learns to rely on internal things: his discernment, his boundaries, his experience, his composure. Internal power always outlasts external power. This is why older men, often without realizing it, become deeply attractive when they stop trying to compete with younger men. Competition itself becomes irrelevant. A mature man knows that presence speaks louder than performance. He doesn't need to demonstrate that he is desirable, capable, intelligent, or valuable. His life already reflects that. His lifestyle, his habits, his decisions, his calmness under pressure, these things quietly communicate who he is. You want to know what makes this kind of confidence so compelling? It creates safety. Not the physical kind, but the emotional and psychological kind. Women gravitate toward the man whose energy feels stable and predictable in a healthy way. A man who doesn't shift when tested. A man who doesn't crumble under uncertainty. A man who doesn't become someone else just to please others. And because that type of emotional stability is so rare, it becomes incredibly attractive. People are drawn to what they don't often see. And what they rarely see is a man who has strength without ego, confidence without noise, authority without arrogance. There's something else that makes quiet confidence powerful. It allows a man to be fully present. He's not thinking about how he looks or how he's being perceived. He's not rehearsing his next line in his head. He's not pretending to be interested just to gain approval. He's focused, truly engaged, because his sense of self is not dependent on the outcome of the interaction. Younger men often chase this state. They try to look confident, act confident, speak confidently. But the key word here is try. Real confidence is never about trying. It is about being. And you cannot be confident consistently until your identity is no longer shaped by fear or insecurity. That transformation takes time. It takes mistakes. It takes failures. It takes letting go of the need to be liked. It takes learning the difference between reacting and responding. It takes learning when to speak and when silence is the greater strength. Older men who carry quiet confidence have undergone these internal battles. They've seen that life rewards composure more than emotional intensity. They understand that the man who controls himself controls the room. They understand that what they tolerate becomes their reality. They understand that a man's energy is more influential than his words. And here's what younger women pick up on immediately. A man who no longer needs attention becomes the man who naturally receives it. It's paradoxical, but true. Value comes from self-assurance, not self-promotion. When an older man embodies this truth, he no longer plays games. He no longer hides his intentions, nor does he exaggerate them. He simply expresses himself clearly, confidently, and without emotional chaos. Honesty becomes his strength, not a vulnerability. Integrity becomes his currency, not a performance. He doesn't use manipulation to feel powerful. He uses boundaries. He doesn't demand loyalty. He inspires it through consistency. Quiet confidence allows a man to move through life with a form of elegance, an emotional refinement that only time and self-awareness create. And that refinement becomes unmistakably attractive, not because he's better than others, but because he's better than the man he used to be. That is what makes older men captivating. That is chess. They do without realizing they embody a form of confidence that has been earned, not acted, a confidence that doesn't shout, but resonates, a confidence that doesn't chase, but attracts, a confidence that isn't about being seen, but about being sure. And the truth is simple: you become far more attractive the moment you no longer need to be. That's the kind of confidence that changes everything. There is a particular shift that happens in a man's life when he stops chasing approval and starts becoming selective about where he places his energy. It is one of the most attractive transformations an older man can go through, not because he is withholding attention, but because the attention he gives is now rooted in intention. And this is where so many younger men get it wrong. They believe attraction is about effort, pursuit, intensity, or proving their worth. But the truth is far simpler, far deeper, and far more unnerving for those who've never experienced it. People are drawn to the man who values himself enough to be selective. When a man matures, truly matures, he stops giving his time, his emotions, and his focus to everything and everyone. He evaluates what contributes to his peace and what disrupts it. He evaluates who respects his boundaries and who tests them. He evaluates who shows genuine interest and who is simply intrigued by the idea of him. And the moment he begins to protect his energy with intention, something powerful happens. Respect begins to follow him. Not because he asked for it, but because people naturally respect the man who respects himself. Younger women instantly notice this distinction. It's not arrogance. It's not disinterest. It's not emotional distance. It is discipline, emotional discipline, the kind that says, I am willing to walk away from anything that costs me my self-respect. And that, more than anything, creates magnetism, not availability, not excess attention, not performed confidence, but the ability to stand rooted in one's standards regardless of who enters the room. Younger women are not impressed by men who give attention too easily. They are impressed by men who give their attention meaningfully. When a man becomes selective, his presence becomes valuable. When a man stops chasing, his energy becomes intriguing. When a man stops reacting impulsively, his silence becomes powerful. This is the difference between childish desire and mature connection. It is the difference between wanting someone and choosing someone. The man who is selective is the man who understands his value. And that kind of man is rare, rare enough that people feel it immediately. Rare enough that women become curious, because curiosity is naturally drawn toward what it cannot easily access. But being selective does not mean being closed. It means being conscious, conscious of intention, conscious of compatibility, conscious of energy, conscious of what aligns with the life he is building. This is what older men gradually learn. You cannot attract the right thing if you are emotionally available to everything. If a man's attention is spread thin, so will be the quality of his connections. Selectiveness is not about building walls, it's about building standards. Standards that protect the emotional, mental, and relational integrity he spent years developing. Standards that filter who enters his life. Standards that keep him from repeating old mistakes. And the fascinating part is this: emotional discipline doesn't just create attraction, it creates clarity. When a man is selective, he sees people for who they are instead of who he wishes they would be. He doesn't project fantasies onto them. He doesn't chase illusions. He doesn't ignore red flags just to feel wanted. He doesn't fall in love with potential. He looks at the reality in front of him and decides deliberately. That is a maturity that younger men often lack. Not because they are incapable, but because they haven't yet experienced the consequences of being unselective. Women find this refreshing, grounding, and deeply attractive. A man who is selective forces them to rise to their best selves when interacting with him. Not because he demands it, but because his energy naturally elevates the dynamic. He doesn't tolerate inconsistency, so inconsistency fades. He doesn't react emotionally, so emotional manipulation loses power. He doesn't seek validation, so games become pointless. His discipline shapes the quality of the interaction, and this emotional discipline doesn't only show in what he accepts, it shows in how he responds. A selective man doesn't argue to be right. He doesn't raise his voice to prove his strength. He doesn't beg, chase, or convince. When something violates his peace, he simply steps back. When someone disrespects him, he quietly distances himself. When someone tests his worth, he doesn't flinch. He allows them to reveal their intentions and then makes a decision based on what he observes, not what he hopes. This ability to step back, to not get entangled in emotional chaos, is one of the most attractive traits a man can possess. It signals that he isn't driven by impulse, but by principle, and principles create stability. Stability creates trust, and trust creates attraction. This is why younger women gravitate towards older men who possess emotional discipline. They aren't drawn to the age, they are drawn to the stillness, the inner calm, the quiet power, the refusal to be shaken by superficial things, the ability to remain grounded even when tested. That type of man becomes a psychological anchor in a world full of emotional volatility. And perhaps the most intriguing part is that emotional discipline is contagious. When a woman interacts with a man who has mastered self-control, she naturally softens, her energy shifts, she feels safer, understood, and less pressured. She doesn't feel the need to perform or create unnecessary emotional tension. She can relax into her more feminine qualities, intuition, warmth, vulnerability, because she trusts the environment his discipline creates. Most men think attraction is about appearance, effort, or intensity. But deeper attraction is built through something entirely different: how a woman feels in the presence of a man. And the presence of a selective man who has emotional discipline gives her something she rarely feels with younger men: security. The man who is selective isn't moved by scarcity. He lives from abundance. He doesn't fear losing someone because he knows what he brings. He doesn't cling to connections out of insecurity because he has lived enough to understand that not everything that feels good is good for him. He has standards for himself first, and through that, standards for others. That's the essence of masculine presence, not force, but discernment. Not intensity, but stability. Not control over others, but mastery over self. As men age, this mastery becomes more accessible because they begin to understand the cost of losing themselves. They've tasted relationships where they compromised too much, where they allowed disrespect, where they tolerated uncertainty, where they ignored their intuition, and eventually they decide not to repeat the patterns that damaged them. That decision becomes the root of emotional discipline. It becomes the foundation of their selectiveness. It becomes the key to their attraction, because a man who knows what he will not allow becomes far more powerful than a man who chases what he wants. And this is what younger women truly find so compelling. They are not drawn to the man who tries to be everything to everyone. They are drawn to the man who is someone with conviction, someone with boundaries, someone with purpose, someone whose attention has value because it isn't given lightly. When a man reaches this level of emotional discipline and selectiveness, he no longer competes, he no longer chases, he no longer proves. He simply becomes the man others gravitate toward, and the truth is simple: a man who protects his peace becomes impossible to replace. The closing thought is this: selectiveness is not isolation, it is evolution, and the man who evolves becomes the man the world is naturally drawn to. One of the most misunderstood things about attraction is the belief that it's driven by age, appearance, or status. People rarely talk about this, but attraction at a deeper level operates on a completely different frequency, one that younger men often cannot access, not because they lack potential, but because they haven't lived enough life to develop that depth. And this is where older men carry an undeniable advantage. Not a superficial advantage, but a psychological and energetic one. Because experience doesn't just teach a man, it transforms him. Experience becomes presence, And presence is something you cannot fake, cannot buy, and cannot rush yourself into embodying. True presence is the quiet power a man carries when he has lived enough to understand himself. It's the subtle authority that comes from surviving situations that could have broken him. It's the calmness that comes from problems he no longer fears because he has solved them before. It's the way he stands, the way he listens, the way he doesn't get emotionally thrown off by situations that would overwhelm a younger man. Presence is the energy of a man who doesn't just know himself, he trusts himself. Younger women sense this immediately. They feel the difference between a man who is still constructing his identity and a man who has already built it. They feel the difference between a man who is still seeking external validation and a man who stands firm in internal validation. They feel the difference between a man who reacts and a man who responds. When an older man operates from this level of grounded presence, it creates an emotional gravity around him. His energy feels stable, safe, structured, intentional, and stability has always been attractive, especially in a world where people are constantly overwhelmed by uncertainty. Presence cannot be manufactured because it is rooted in experience, real experience, lived experience, the kind of experience that forces a man to confront himself, challenge his own illusions, rebuild his own identity, and develop a sense of inner strength that cannot be shaken. That depth becomes visible in everything he does. It shows in the way he pauses before he speaks. It shows in the way he maintains eye contact without trying to dominate. It shows in the way he stands still in moments where others panic. It shows in the way he can handle silence, because silence doesn't intimidate a man who is at peace with himself. When a man has lived through heartbreak, betrayal, failure, loss, uncertainty, and survived it, he develops a different relationship with life. He no longer fears the things he once feared. He no longer views challenges as threats. He sees them as tests he is capable of passing. And that inner confidence becomes magnetic, because people naturally gravitate toward those who possess emotional steadiness. When an older man operates from this inner strength, younger women sense it immediately. They know they are not dealing with a boy who is guessing. They are dealing with a man who knows. And this is what many older men underestimate. The presence you carry is more attractive than anything you could ever say. It is more attractive than the compliments you give, the efforts you make, the gestures you perform. Presence communicates something words never could. Presence says, I am here, I am grounded, I am not shaken, and that type of masculine presence is deeply reassuring. It signals maturity. It signals safety. It signals leadership, not over others, but over oneself. A man with presence never feels the need to rush, to push, or to impress. He moves at his own pace. He speaks with intentionality. He listens with clarity. He evaluates instead of reacting. That evaluation itself is powerful because it shows he isn't led by impulse. He is led by discernment. Young men often jump. Older men choose. And that difference is felt. Experience builds patience. And patience is a sign of inner mastery. When a man is patient, it does not mean he is slow. It means he is in control. It means he understands timing. It means he knows that what is meant for him won't require desperation. Younger women feel that patience as emotional security. They feel the absence of panic, the absence of neediness, the absence of impulsive reactions. They feel a man who has learned not to let emotions drive him, but to let wisdom guide him. There is also something deeply attractive about the masculine restraint older men carry. Not restraint in affection or warmth, but restraint in impulsivity. A younger man may respond emotionally, exaggerate or overexpress. A mature man pauses, thinks, and centers himself before he acts. That restraint is not cold, it's powerful, because it communicates emotional maturity. It communicates that he knows who he is even in moments of tension. And that ability to remain centered during uncertainty is one of the clearest signs of true masculinity. It tells a woman, this man can handle life, not just the good moments, but the complicated ones. Women naturally gravitate toward men who can handle complexity because life itself is complex. Surface level charm fades, but deep-rooted presence grows stronger with time. And presence becomes a form of emotional leadership, not dominance, not control. Leadership, the ability to guide a moment, anchor a conversation, calm a situation, hold emotional space, and bring clarity instead of confusion. This is what experience gives a man. It gives him the ability to create emotional order, not by force, but by stability. When a man carries that stability, women feel it immediately. They feel the difference between a man who is overwhelmed and a man who is composed. They feel the difference between a man who needs attention to feel validated and a man who feels validated by his own journey. And they instinctively trust the man who carries himself with lived wisdom. A man with presence becomes unforgettable, not because he tries to be, but because he is rare. Most men spend their lives trying to be seen. A man with presence is seen without effort. That is the luxury of maturity. That is the advantage experience gives. That is the intangible quality younger men envy but cannot fully replicate. Presence is the final stage of masculine development. The stage where a man no longer performs, no longer competes, no longer proves, no longer chases. He becomes. And becoming is always more powerful than performing. The closing truth is this: presence is not built in a moment. It is built in a lifetime. And the man who fully embraces his experience becomes a force the world cannot ignore.